So Rana, welcome to Ukraine, and thank you very much for being brave like Ukraine and coming now under the war conditions here. I've got first questions. They are related first to the ERA, Economic Resilience Action Program, which was approved by the IFC in December last year. What has been the progress with this program? And the second question is about your yesterday agreements signed by you as a regional director of IFC, and President Zelenskyy in his evening address already mentioned about 250 million investments. So could you elaborate more details about this?
Thank you, Andrei, for having me here. And before I answer your questions, I really want to say thank you to the country for welcoming me here. As regional director for IFC in Europe, this is my first time in Ukraine, and I feel very proud to be able to come and see the resilience of the people firsthand, to talk to people, to visit the country. And my thanks is really to you and to all of the Ukrainians for their incredible resilience and for the determination to help the people in the country. So I think that, for me, is the most important thing. Now, on IFC's question for the ERA, the Economic Resilience Action Program that IFC had put together. So this is a $2 billion program that we would like to use to support the private sector. A little bit about IFC. IFC can only work with the private sector. We don't work with the public sector. We don't work really with state-owned enterprises. It's the private sector. And what we are saying is that during this time, we need to help the private sector. Just a couple of things to share with you. I think many people know, but it's also important to share with the wider audience. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the private sector made 70%, contributed 70% of the GDP of the country. So what does that mean? That means jobs, that means goods and services that are coming in and out of the country. And we think it's very important to support this very important component of the economy, which is the private sector. And this $2 billion is really there to support the private sector now across a range of sectors. We are looking at private sector agribusiness, we are looking at infrastructure, and we are working with financial partners to help support small and medium-sized and mid-sized enterprises. So the $2 billion is really to help a range of industries and to be used now as the economy needs to keep going and to demonstrate the resilience. So that is really the large component of the $2 billion that IFC has put together. Since we've announced this economic resilience, or actually since Russia's invasion of Ukraine back in February of 2022, IFC has already put in, now committed about 250 million in the country. And we've done that alone, we've done that at our own risk, and it's something we're prepared to do. And we're looking to continue to do more and to scale up. And for this, the other component of this ERA program is to work with donor partners to help us de-risk and blend, what we call blending for our investments, and that'll allow us to scale up to the $2 billion, where IFC would put $1 billion on our own balance sheet and bring in $1 billion of donor financing to allow for $2 billion. But actually, if you ask me, I think if we're able to bring in $1 billion of donor financing, I think we can go well beyond the $2 billion mark, because I think it will work to catalyze and leverage even more investments. That's been our experience, is that the private sector is not $1 in, $1 out. It's $1 in, $4 or $5 or $3 or $4 out. So we hope we will catalyze even more.
Thank you. Then what about the agreements that deals that you signed yesterday when you came to
Of
Kyiv?
course, yes, and that's what we brought a large team from IFC from all over the world into Ukraine. And of course, yesterday we signed in the presence of President Zelenskyy, which was really a fabulous and monumental occasion for us to support Horizon Capital, which is a private equity fund that's focused on investing in the tech sector. And IFC provided an additional 30 million. So now our total commitment into that fund is 60 million. And I'm proud to say we are the largest investor in Horizons Fund. And as I had mentioned, this fund is focused on the tech sector, which has proven to be a very, very large and important sector where Ukraine has a lot of competitive advantage. It also can generate more jobs, more export opportunities for Ukraine. And so we think this will provide a catalyst to even more job creation. So we're very proud to be partnering with Horizon Capital, along with other development finance institutions as well. And yes, indeed, it was wonderful to be able to sign this agreement with President Zelenskyy yesterday.
What about you mentioned kind of other directions, so it's like infrastructure. Do you mean this like transportation infrastructure, ports, something like that, or what is meant?
So we're really looking across the range of the sectors of infrastructure. So let me give you an example of how we're going about it. So the World Bank produced this really amazing report on, they called the Rapid Damage Needs Assessment, which talks about the needs for reconstruction in Ukraine. And they looked across 15 sectors and what would be the cost for reconstructing. And that was recently produced, I think just last month, and they came up with $411 billion. What we are doing now in partnership with the bank is taking these 15 sectors and then looking at doing a deeper dive to say which sectors are where we can bring in the private sector earlier. And so that we're looking across, we're looking at transport, we've notified one, energy will be another, logistics, and of course a whole range of others, like we're looking at agri, housing, and so there's a whole range of sectors. And what we're doing is then prioritizing those, and in doing that saying, where can the private sector come in? So if to your specific question on infrastructure, I would say there is room for the private sector across. When you do that, they may come in a little differently in different sectors, but we think we can structure and bring in the private sector across a number of different areas. Certainly, like you said, transport, ports, logistics is one area where we do think the private sector will be active and where we can bring in good private sector partners.
And one of the reasons why I asked it is that because like some objects of this like infrastructure, they are owned by the state in Ukraine. And so as you mentioned, the key approach of IFC is working with private sector. But certainly if they will be about like state-owned object like ports, are you thinking about like making some exceptions or some new approaches to this topic? Or?
Well, I think it's a bigger question, and I think we'll have to look at it in many different ways, but maybe I can give you some of the conversations that we're having or some of the areas where we can support the government. Indeed, yes, the government is involved in many aspects of infrastructure, but we also think there's opportunity to bring in private players to privatize, to open up the capital to private sector players, and that's where IFC can be a big help. So it's not just bringing private sector for the sake of it, but it's saying, this is an area where you can alleviate budget and resources from the government. If structured properly, you can bring in private investors and private capital and help improve efficiencies and help improve operations. And these are the kinds of things that IFC can help. And there are a number of different areas where we've had conversations with the government in energy and in transport and ports, where we do think opportunities for privatization could be one of the keys of unlocking, bringing in more capital.
You reminded me that recently the State Property Fund of Ukraine, they successfully privatized at least one, as far as I know, Uсть-Dunaysk seaport on the Black Sea. And it's been successfully privatized during the war times. My question is, some of our readers from business, they asked about any opportunities for business insurance, mitigating military risks. So is IFC somehow involved, or some organizations from the World Bank group are involved into this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the World Bank has multiple arms. The IBRD, which people refer to as the World Bank, is the big public sector arm, does a lot of the funding, does their funding through governments, and IFC works with the private sector. But we have MIGA, which is the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, and that's also part of the World Bank Group, and they work on insurance as well. And I know that they are looking at ways of scaling up and providing more in the context of Ukraine.
Perhaps the question which is kind of urgent for, and will be urgent for, not only for business, but also for Ukrainian citizens, and it is about evaluation of economic situation. So how I see your experts evaluate the economic situation and economic prospects of Ukraine under these very difficult conditions.
Yeah, it's true. This is a very challenging time. I think economic prospects, we're very positive. We think that the Ukraine definitely has strong prospects. Maybe I'll share just a few figures of what we've observed and why we think it's important for us to help right now. As I mentioned before the war, 70% of the GDP was attributed to the private sector. And in 2022, I believe there was a contraction of the GDP somewhere close to 30%. And maybe just sharing another figure for you to keep in mind, people at risk of poverty poverty increased from 5.5% to 24%, which is another 7 million people, through many different factors, have entered poverty into Ukraine. And what are the ways of fixing that? It's creating jobs, it's creating business, it's getting the economy moving again. With your question on the prospects, we think there are a lot of prospects in create. I'm seeing it. I'm coming here, around the city of Kyiv. I was just in Irpin earlier today, looking, observing. We took a tour of some of the houses that were damaged, and saw how they've been rehabilitated. But through that, I was able to see the resilience and the determination of the people. And what that tells me is the prospects are there, and the ability is there, and the country can do it. And that's what IFC is here, is to really help you, continue to strengthen and improve resilience and develop jobs. So yes, a lot of prospects, but we need to help the country right now during this challenging time.
When IFC developed this assistance package, but basically, did you keep in mind any kind of blueprints from international experience? Because it's as we often say here, it is unprecedented situation, and so did you? And I know that you've got an international experience, working in Asia, now working in Europe. So, any comparisons, any lessons from other countries under the relatively the same situation?
Maybe I'll start by saying there's no two situations the same. Yeah. My experience has shown me that there's never a complete blueprint. You have to be able to assess and adapt on the ground. But I can share a few thoughts. But each situation I find is different. And of course, as you mentioned, I had been in Asia for quite some time and had to work through different challenges there. This is very different. One thing that I will say that is important, and this is what we are trying to do, is if you want to support and come in and invest, you don't wait. You come in soon and you do it across the country and across the economy. You support the public sector and you support the private sector. And for me, if you were to ask, one is the important lesson that I've learned and my experience tells me, is that you've got to come in early. Some of the conversations we've been having, we wait private sector only on reconstruction, and what we've been saying is, no, you need to do it now. And the resilience of the Ukrainian companies and the people demonstrate that you can do it now.
I've got some personal attachment to IFC because my actually professional career started 30 years ago with the land reform project, which has been supported at that time by IFC. And so my question is actually, okay, 30 years passed away, there were many reforms. What is your opinion? What is your evaluation of regulatory environment now in Ukraine, and any need for further other economic reforms?
So that's some of the things that so IFC is also working with the government as a strategic advisory role. And as we look at how we bring in the private sector, part of this is also what reforms are needed. And there's a whole range of areas. And also the World Bank absolutely is looking at that. Maybe what I can mention is a few things that we think is important. And this is something the government is doing. And I think one is reforms to help the business enabling environment, to try to bring in more private sector, to see, as I mentioned, looking at assets where you can bring in more private capital, where the state had felt more comfortable being in. And now we know, and experience has shown, that the private sector can come in through different areas, whether energy, transport, logistics, that we have seen models work around the globe, and we can introduce that more so in Ukraine. And the models, we have a lot of experience now. We can show us not all one size fits all. We can structure it for the needs and the construct and this, the structural shape of the economy in Ukraine. So I would say bringing in and that enabling environment to bring in the private sector. The other thing which has come up a lot in the discussions which we're supporting the government is to strengthen, for example, the anti-corruption laws. This is something that I know the government and the conversations have been incredibly positive and they're keen on. And by strengthening that, you will also catalyze and mobilize much more financing. Those are a few things that I would maybe share with you.
I know that you came to Kyiv yesterday, and basically you've got, and today you are living, and you've got this 2 days full of meetings with governmental officials, with business partners. What is your impression? I mean, personal impressions of this high-rank people from the government, from business, just from people whom you see or communicated on the streets. What is it?
It's, to be honest, Andrei, it's been incredibly amazing to see. And as I've been telling people, you can talk to people on these Zoom calls, you can read about it, but until you're here, until you talk to the people, until you see it yourself, that's what really resonates, and that's what's resonated for me and really has left a very strong impression. The resilience, the tenacity of the Ukrainians is really something to be admired. And so my impression has been, it's been an amazing experience, and I will certainly, of course, be back in Ukraine, and I look forward to coming back, but really had very, very productive meetings with government, with the private sector, and also with friends and colleagues here, the IFC staff here on the ground who are working very, very hard, and talking to everybody that we've been able to interact with here. I think it's been really a very, very, for me, a memorable experience, and I will certainly come back soon.
I read some of your interviews with your partners about your experience in Armenia, in Georgia, in Romania, and you talk there about the priorities of IFCs, green, everything green, green energy, renewable energy, etc. Then about digitalization. Do I understand correctly that these priorities are now for Ukraine, they're kind of shelved in? Just what will be kind of future prospects for IFC?
So the climate agenda in Ukraine is there. I can tell you, Andrei, it's there, and there are many opportunities. So yes, I gave you what we were looking at sectors, but in that we are looking at doing it sustainably, doing it green, whether it's enhancing renewable energy, whether it's enhancing energy efficiency, whether it's mitigating the climate footprint, all of that we are doing. In a way, this is what we would call build back better. And so that's very much IFC's intent. It's important to do this and to do this green because, one, the costs of investing in green technology, it's declined. So it's very, very economic. It's much more economical than it was 20 years ago. So it's and our experience has shown that you can do this across sectors. And secondly, with the advent of technology and digitalization, you can do it at a much more efficient way than it had been done in the past. Technology has really allowed you to scale up in doing things in a climate-friendly, and more sustainable way. And then thirdly, if I just even focus just on the energy sector itself, it also helps create resilience in the economy. And we're talking about building back better, but also building it resiliently to replicate the people of Ukraine. And in doing that, you need to invest in more climate-friendly investments. So it's not only good for the climate, but it's good for business. And it helps improve the resilience of the economy.
Do I understand that it's kind of okay for the moment? It's not the priority now. More, it's the priority is put more on some like urgent assistance package, something like that.
I think that's a good point. So some of the things of the ERA that we're doing is going to be very short-term working capital needs. So there are many companies and financial institutions that need to support, whether they're SMEs or medium or large companies, their working capital challenges right now because it's taking much longer to get products into the country and much longer to take products out of the country. So just providing that liquidity is critical. So that is one large component of what we're doing. Yes, indeed. And that's a big part of what we're doing. We're working with agri companies, we're working with financial institutions to help them extend their work. And these are shorter term facilities. And that we're also increasing. But also as we're looking with some of the companies we're talking to, as they're looking to build in capacity, to do capacity improvements, in that you can have energy efficiency components and more climate-friendly related components. So, and some of the housing support and rehabilitation and construction that we're working on involves an energy efficiency component to it. So it is in the program, but yes, some of the shorter term stuff is really working capital related.
And I remember that before the war, IFC was running some like projects about like a green housing or something like that. So are they still alive? I mean, so still realizing?
We have two projects that we are working on. So we have one where we are working. This is with the European Union as our partner, where we're for the rehabilitation of homes that have been damaged, and the other is for homes built for internationally displaced people. There is an energy efficiency component that is continuing and ongoing as part of that.
I know that before the war, I mean, IFC was pretty much involved, and by the way, the question is, so when IFC office will come back?
So this is something we're also like, we are here. You have a big team from IFC that has come in, as I said, from all over the world, and we will certainly be back. But part of it is also assessing our location and for us to come back on a more longer term basis. And to hopefully be able to open the office here soon. So that's definitely IFC's intent.
So I hope that like in the nearest future we will see and we will watch more news from IFC about some more agreements, more deals which will profit the Ukrainian business and the Ukrainian people.
and I too, and I look forward to seeing you again here in Kyiv. Okay. Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.